Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar by the Institute of Leadership and Management. My name is Nicholas Lynch. I'm a consultant working with the Institute, and I'm going to chair today's webinar. Today's webinar is the latest in our series around the leadership framework, and it's on collaboration, managing customer relations. I'm delighted to introduce Harriet Cooper-Wall. Harriet is a Program Director at ITM Productions Industry News. She creates online broadcast standard industry news style programs using a reporter-led format to communicate issues on behalf of leading industry bodies and national and international associations. Harriet gained experience in news output during her time at the Press Association and the Daily Telegraph. Harriet, can I hand over to you?
Of course, absolutely. Delighted to be here, and thank you very much. The Institute of Leadership and Management identifies 5 separate dimensions of great leadership, namely authenticity, vision, achievement, ownership, and collaboration. As many of you will know, each of the 49 webinars focuses on one of the components of each dimension, highlighting essential learning to assist your leadership development. The 5th dimension of the Dimensions of Leadership webinar series is collaboration. Collaborative leaders know about relationships and networking. They work effectively with others. They involve, motivate, and engage colleagues. They make great colleagues themselves and are excellent at managing difference. Today's webinar will explore managing customer relationships as we ask, why is effectively managing customer relationships so important to be an effective leader? And how can we ensure that this ethos is adopted throughout our organisation? We have here a collaborative leader invests in relationships with customers. Well, why is that so important? The answer is that to be successful, organisations have to realise that customers are the lifeblood of their business, and they need to know as much about their customers as possible in order to adopt a successful strategy. Now, there is often a strong emphasis on new customer acquisition, and whilst that is important, it's really vital that we don't neglect our existing partners. Why is that the case? Well, by and large, people don't like change. All of us are consistently looking for the path of least resistance. Now, in a business and in a customer context, this means that your existing customers' default positions are to remain working with you. So your organisation is already in a very, very strong position to keep and capitalise on the partnerships that you have. Meet the demands of your customers' needs just enough, and they are unlikely to leave. But the step up from that we should all aspire to is to deliver a fantastic level of customer service. At that stage, not only will your customers not leave, but they will recommend you to others. Now, we've got the logos that you are all familiar with here, so LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. And the reason that we've included that is to remind leaders that in the social media age, every individual that they interact with has a voice. And not only a voice, but ready-made platforms to share their views with their extended networks. I have here an overview of what we're going to discuss today. So within managing customer relationships, we're looking at 3 key areas: CRM theory, recognizing customers, and managing customers. But before we go into that level of detail, we felt it was really important when talking about effectively managing customer relationships. What exactly does that mean? What are those objectives? And the Institute of Leadership and Management have identified 4 key attributes. So we've touched already upon the importance of reducing the rate of customer defection. We also, though, want to look at increasing the longevity of the customer relationship, of enhancing the growth potential. So that's really about making sure that all of your customers are kept up to date with the different products and services that you offer that could provide value to them. And the final point is around high profit customers, so high value relationships. We are always already aware of exactly who our high value relationships are. So this is about really embedding that into practice. Do focus disproportionate effort on those high profile customers. Now, the IDIC methodology is a theoretical framework that outlines how we can achieve the objectives just discussed. Ultimately, we need to consistently engage with our customers as individuals. Ask ourselves, what value do they bring to our organisation? What do they need from us? And how should we be interacting with them and adapting our products and services to their requirements? Now, in my opinion, the key point that needs to be emphasised is to engage with your customers as individuals. Emotion-led communication is often believed to be more suitable for business-to-consumer organisations, but research from CEB's Marketing Leadership Council and Google has illustrated that business-to-business purchasers are almost 50% more likely to buy a product or service when they see personal value. So whether that be an opportunity for career advancement or even admiration from colleagues, it still is all about the individual objective. Now, we've spoken to a certain degree about the importance of strategy within this already. So what needs to be addressed and touched upon is how are we as leaders going to deliver this level of service? So CRM is often referred to in the context of technology. So that would be a software or database that records, reports and analyzes interactions between organizations and existing and potential customers. So this will be software that's purchased from specialized vendors. But something that's interesting and equally important is customer relationship management, CRM, as a process. So how are those relationships managed? How fully are our teams embracing the technology that we're giving them access to? And how faithfully are they recording transactions with customers? Now, a really clear example of how these are so important is probably an agenda or a situation that we've all been in. When you have multiple points of contact within an organization, these conversations need to be recorded. The understanding of the staff has to be there, because otherwise what will happen is your customer is going to be having the same conversation over and over again with different members of your team. And as we all know, that can make for a somewhat frustrating experience, certainly not the level of customer relationship management that we're looking to aspire to. I think it's clear that these three are not necessarily independent, and the next slide provides a definition that brings the three together and is how the Institute sees customer relationship management. Now, many of you will already be familiar with the diagram above, as this outlines our customer journey. So our interaction with customers starts with our capacity to make our target market aware of and interested in our brand, in our products and services. Now, following this is the process around the initial purchase decision, and finally, our capacity to create brand advocates. I've touched already on the different dynamics between business to business, so B2C, and business to consumer, B2C environments. And, there are clear differences in those buying cycles. The values are often larger within B2B, therefore eliminating that impulse purchase, which is often very emotionally driven. But another potential pitfall with business to business is multiple stakeholders. So when a potential new customer is deciding whether to work with your organization or not, each person involved will have a different set of expectations, priorities, and perceptions of value. Now, each stakeholder in the decision-making process will be consistently asking themselves, what value does working with this organization deliver for me? So it's critical, and the reason that I bring this up now is what we need to do is make sure that every person that's involved in the decision-making process is brought through this funnel, is made consistently aware of what the value proposition of working with your organization means for them. And not only is this really important for leaders themselves to know, but make sure that information is communicated effectively throughout the business. I wanted to take a point here take some time here to explore actually who are your customers. So thus far, and generally speaking, customers are defined as external individuals or organizations that purchase the goods or the services that you produce. Now, despite that, the importance of the internal customer should not be overlooked. Now, we've defined an internal customer as anyone directly connected with your organization who relies on assistance or interaction from another colleague in the organization to carry out their job responsibilities. Now, one example of this is within the hospitality environment, so within a restaurant environment. Chefs and waiting staff depend on each other to be able to fulfill their individual tasks. And the reason that I use that example specifically is to illustrate that internal customers are central to any organization's success, as they have a significant impact on the external customer experience. So when defining the business development and marketing strategy of your organization, it's really important to assess how profitable each segment is likely to be and therefore how much resource should be dedicated to it. We need to ask the question, who are the consumers that are most likely to engage with your product or service? And what are some of the contributing factors that your organization specifically needs to consider? Now, the above are some frequently used market segments. So geographic refers to the location of customers, demographic factors such as age, gender, and income. Now, psychographic segmentation is a means of acquiring knowledge by asking consumers to agree or disagree with activities, interests, and opinion statements. The final point is around behavioral segmentation, grouping customers based on specific behavioral patterns that they display when making purchasing decisions. And doing that enables the producers, so the business leaders, to adapt their marketing approach to specific groups. Now, examples of grouping patterns may include spending, for example, consumption, lifestyle, usage, and desired benefits. But whatever the variables chosen, market segments must satisfy 5 key criteria if they are to be considered useful. So the first question is this segment measurable? Can we track the size, the purchasing power, and the characteristics of this segment? Substantial? Are they viable? Are they large enough and profitable to serve? Accessible is an interesting one because then it looks to the specific organizations. Are your products and services such that they can be delivered remotely, or do you need to be within reasonable distance in order to make sure that's the case? I wanted to take a point to talk about differentiation here because it is critical that actually these segments are conceptually distinguishable. We do need to ensure that they will respond differently to different strategies. And I think, the final point is, are they actionable? Can you create programs that will engage with and attract these segments to your products and services? I think it is really clear that effective leaders must identify key characteristics of their target demographic and really look to ensure that their marketing activity is tailored to the priorities of this market. Now, this is an approach that can and has been used to great effect, but it really is important that there's sufficient research undertaken before commitments are made. I refer again to the digital and the social age in which we live, where information and anecdotes about a brand can go viral within minutes. It's absolutely critical that marketing activities strike the right tone. Now, an example that many of you will already be aware of that was not terribly well received recently was a crisps brand's decision to create a bag of crisps that were less noisy to eat and came in smaller bags to fit in women's handbags. So this is a very clear example of a market segment being identified that the attraction program used did not resonate. Now, in a more positive light, there are a couple of recent examples of market segmentation being used to great effect. So Sainsbury's are currently trialling a relaxed checkout lane in partnership with Alzheimer's Scotland. Now, they have identified a market segment that may need more time to finalise their purchases, and they've also invested in training their staff to be better able to look after dementia sufferers and the elderly. Another brand to recognise the importance of customer relationships is Majestic Wine. So they've taken the strategic decision to invest more in staff training than in stores. Now, one example of this being in knowledge and understanding of wine, because they've identified a segment of their customers who have a vested interest in wine. They are open to and seeking a higher level of knowledge. And so Majestic have sensed that appetite, they've recorded that appetite and are training staff to be able to deliver. Now, we have covered quite a lot of material today, but I wanted to leave you with 2 key points that I think are critical. So the first is around, why is customer relationship management so important? Well, the answer is because it is a major driver of company profitability is the aggregate value of the company's customer base. Now, on the final point, at its core, there's a lot of discussion about the potential definitions of CRM, but ultimately what that is all of the activities, strategies and technologies that companies use to manage their interactions with their current and potential customers. Thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to take any questions.
Harriet, many thanks for taking us through that presentation. We've just got time for a few questions. Maybe the first one is, you've emphasized how important this is, yeah, and in several places you showed what happens when it goes wrong. But we read sort of all the time about companies that have really poor customer relations and really bad profiles on social media. I'm thinking of sort of the utilities, you know, the train companies, the phone companies, right, and so on. Yeah. So I suppose the question here is, you know, how lots of companies seem to get this very badly wrong, and yet they still have lots of customers. So isn't that sort of slightly contradicting what you've said about how important it is?
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There's very clear, you've given the examples there, that actually, yes, it is possible for brands to get away with poor customer relationship management. But, you know, whether it's possible or not is to a large degree beside the point. You know, this is about aspirations, and we at all, as aspiring great leaders, should be wanting to deliver an exceptional level of customer service. So what's this about? This is not about doing the minimum you can do to get away with. This is about stepping up and delivering for your customers.
Right. A second slightly different question, which is, well, to put it bluntly, how much of this applies to the public sector? Because, you know, in the public sector, people really don't have a choice very often about who their provider is, and they can't leave or go, you know, they can't leave and go somewhere else. So, I mean, to what extent do you think what you've been talking about here applies in, I don't know, the health service or education?
It's a good question, actually, and I think the critical thing to remember with this is that, yes, absolutely, this does apply to the public sector. You know, this is not about making a decision as to who you may or may not want to work with. This is about taking the customers that you have, and, you know, almost particularly the case if they're beholden to work with you. You have an obligation to deliver them a specific service or a specific product. And so doing that to the absolute height of your ability is paramount.
So we're still aiming, whatever sector we're in, we're still aiming to achieve what you've really
whatever we're doing, whatever organisation that we're working with, we should always be aiming for the highest possible state of achievement.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you one final question, which is you raise this interesting example of the women, like I say, women's crisps. Yeah, the crisps that were smaller bags fit in the handbag and so on.
That were not terribly well received by the great and the good of Twitter.
Right. So that there's a really bad idea, or, you know, the campaign goes down really badly. How did they get that so wrong? Yeah, because you know, there must have been an awful lot of effort put into coming up with this idea, I would imagine, yeah, in some marketing company somewhere, and yet it seems to have really gone down badly and
fallen somewhat flat. I mean, I completely agree with you, and I think it's a concern, isn't it, really, how that can go so wrong. But I am really pleased that you asked that question, because as far as I'm concerned, from my perspective, this makes a really, really important point about the value of diversity within an organisation. Absolutely, within organisations, we need to have a team that is reflective of the customers that we are serving. Right now, if we have that, how likely are we to make these potentially catastrophic PR decisions? Probably not very, because the vast majority of women would have told you straight away that actually the smaller and less crunchy crisps is probably a bit of a faux pas that's not going to go down terribly well. But, you know, that absolutely translates across the board. If you are marketing a product to 18 to 24-year-olds from wherever, you know, you need to have the insights of those younger people in order to make sure that your targeting and the way you're interacting with them is on message. Yeah.
Okay, great. Harriet, thanks for taking us through the presentation, and thanks for answering our questions. It's been a really interesting discussion around managing customer relationships. With that, I'm going to close this webinar. Thanks to everybody for listening in to this latest webinar by the Institute of Leadership and Management. And I'm going to close now. Thanks a lot.